We're here. We made it. We're so happy to have everyone join us today. Thank you for joining the Christopher Lafayette podcast show. We have a very special guest with us today. Someone that I've had the pleasure of meeting and speaking to several times. And I've been very intrigued by what's been shared in our conversations. So let's move forward. Let's get started. Shall we begin? Let's chop wood. Ethan Bach, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Who's Ethan Bach?
So I like to talk a little bit about like how I got to doing experiential design and running the company that I'm running and stuff, because I think that really tells a lot about my story. To start off, like I wasn't a person who grew up with a lot of technology and access to technology. And I was literally like, I went into environmental conservation when I was young. And I was like literally out in the woods calling spotted owls for my summertime. And I didn't want anything to do with technology. I thought it was the antithesis of saving the environment and all these things. And I was at the Evergreen State College for my undergrad, and they have programs where you have integrated classrooms, basically. And I was taking a city development course or program, and we had to do a video project. And I didn't want anything to do with it. I tried to talk the teachers out of it, which I was pretty good at talking in or out of anything at that time. And they wouldn't let it go. So I had to do a video project. And I fell in love with it. And not only did I fall in love with it and the storytelling of it and being able to tell some of my story and telling other people's story, but I got on the equipment and I could just manage the equipment without anyone telling me how to do it. And this is back non-linear video editing. It wasn't simple. And when the equipment would break, I could fix it. I could teach other people how to use it. And it just came really naturally. But it was really about that self-expression, which I didn't have in other ways. Like I wasn't a good writer. I wasn't really good at just talking about things. So visual expression and storytelling through video was what really captured me into that. So one thing that is important part of this story is that at that same time, I was discovering who I was in a lot of different ways. I was out as queer. And I was starting to really come to terms with my identity as being transgender. And this is, 1994. So you can imagine in 1994, there wasn't a lot of positive representation of transgender people. It was, Maury Povich and trans women like fighting, and that was really it. I think I saw one show where there was transgender men who were in San Francisco, and they were right after the woman who didn't eat food. She just got all of her nutrition from air. And so it was like this sort of mythical thing that didn't really exist. And so it was really a self-exploration and a way for me to tell my story about who I was and my own exploration of that through the visual and storytelling. So all that, and I went into education. So I was working at colleges in different capacities. Ended up in IT and teaching at night, video production. And I decided I wanted to go to grad school. And this is a good like 10, 12 years later. And when I was looking at graduate programs in 2008, what really excited me was this using sensors and using more of an immersive approach to storytelling, because my thing was all about like, how do I reach the audience and sort of change the perception about something and really impact them. So I love this idea about immersive and interactive, because that's a way that we can, and as we know now, everyone knows pretty much, is when we're walking through an immersive, interactive experience, we're changed. We're part of the story, and we're really experiencing something that's going to stay with us. And I just love that so much. So I decided, I was actually working as a researcher and professor after grad school, and I was doing digital domes, which is like a planetarium screen with an IMAX projection. And we were one of the first groups in the world to make that interactive. And it was after 2008, and there was the crash, and academia had really shifted the way that it was run. And I wasn't really meshing with academia as a place to be. So I decided I wanted a bigger impact in the world, and I wanted a bigger audience. So I left academia and I started 2 organizations on the same day. A lot of people called me crazy. But I started Ethos, which is our experiential design agency. And I started Denver Arts and Technology Advancement, or DATA for short, which is a nonprofit that focuses on teaching creative technology for K through 12 and for adults. So really giving people access to this kind of technology and storytelling, because it was then, and it still is now, really in control of old white men, to be honest, and I really wanted to give more people the power to tell their story in these really impactful ways.
In what ways, when we look at storytelling today, where we find ourselves in time, there's clearly the pandemic that still abides. We have entered into a remote hybrid working world. When we talk about immersive and we talk about storytelling, and then taking a part of your culture, of your experiences, your personal journey, what does that look like from your lens perspective? And what does it look like for empowering others?
I think there's a lot of ways to look at that. And I look at it from different lenses, because I do have a for-profit agency and I have a nonprofit organization. So from the nonprofit organization sense, it's about creating a way for accessibility and people to be able to learn these storytelling tools and expressions really accessibly and easily. And something that I know is, like, we can hand our phones to any 5-year-old and they'll probably work it better than us. But do they know how to create something on the phone? Do they know how to create their own story and tell their own story on the phone? And the answer is probably no. They know how to play games and they know how to replicate what's happening, like the floss dance or something for TikTok. They know how to replicate, but do they know how to express? And so one thing that we're doing, especially pre-pandemic, we were looking at building a center for data and having classrooms and having a gallery and having a performance space. And now post-pandemic, we're putting all that in the metaverse. And so, and even like we have a artist in residence program called Morphos for the Digital Dome that we've done in LA, we've done it in Denver, and we're putting that in the metaverse. So people won't have to anymore to do the artist in residence for the Dome, won't have to fly from China to be able to join me, or Australia. I mean, people really came from all over the world. They'll be able to just join me in this virtual space where we're all immersed and we're all able to communicate very clearly and be able to participate without having to leave their day-to-day lives in order to do it. And same with kids, like the accessibility. So data and all ethos have a synergistic relationship. And when all ethos creates something, then data has access to it. So all ethos pre-pandemic, we were doing a lot of permanent and temporary interactive installations. So we were working with museums, we were working a lot with cities. We have like a lot of different interactive installations in cities and outdoors, like permanent interactive projection mapping. We have this thing called the singing tree, which looks like the base of it looks like a regular tree, and then the top of it's all 8-bit, and then you can play music on it. It has LED lights that change. Musical hopscotch, where you create electro swing music by hopping around these different objects. So there's a lot of different things that we've done. And a portion of our business, 30% of our business pre-pandemic was for events. And so we all know what happened with events, right? They changed dramatically during COVID. And just like anyone else, when the pandemic hit and things shut down, we had to reconsider what we were going to do. And we didn't want to go on hiatus. Like a lot of people that we talked to were just like, oh, this is going to be a month or two. We'll just take a vacation and then we'll come back. And I knew that this is going to be a longer deal, a bigger deal. And I didn't see that as a solution. So I wanted to keep my workers busy. I wanted to keep them engaged, and I wanted to problem solve. And so when there's something like a pandemic, there's a lot more problems that are coming out. And I love, our whole business is wrapped around how do we solve things and how do we really create things that are bringing joy and unexpected joy. And so when you're in the middle of a worldwide pandemic at that doesn't seem to be ending at this point, those things are very important. And so we immediately shifted and added some different concepts and offerings to our business, which is doing immersive events. And so we went in and we were using various platforms with immersive worlds to create those. And during that time, we decided that we didn't really like the platforms that we were using and they weren't really built for what we were doing. So we decided to build our own metaverse. So now we have our own metaverse, which is super exciting. And we're doing some events in there coming very soon. And then we're doing a big launch later on this year, towards the end of the year. And so Data gets to use the metaverse. And so now Data has a place. We have an educational place in that Pathos metaverse. And we are going to be building digital domes in the digital metaverse. And so we'll be having classrooms and different workshops and stuff in there. And it's all browser based. So that's where it comes into this accessibility. Most digital worlds you have to download, or if you're browser based, it's really low poly. And so the one that we have and that we have created is you can go low poly or high poly, you can switch between them, but it's really a high poly option that is in the browser and allows for a lot of expression and a lot of accessibility. The other thing I want to point out about our metaverse is that it's really diverse in what kind of character you can be in terms of ethnicity, skin color, skin tone, height, weight, characters, that kind of thing. And that was really important to us to make sure that people could express themselves in a way that was representative of who they are.
And that's fascinating on so many different levels. For the audience listening and joining with us today, I have Ethan Bach, and we've segued into the metaverse, which has been here for some time, but has become increasingly more prevalent in this last year and a half in particular, as a great and wonderful opportunity serving as an intermediary to bringing communities together. And as Ethan just expressed about immersive worlds, and that's largely a big part of what the metaverse is today. I want to talk a little bit about virtual worlds. And as someone that is a staunch advocate of community being the center and the heart of technology itself, with your metaversal contribution and platform that you have and that you're building, and in bringing community and centralizing community together, what does that look like for the person that is just now understanding what they might be able to do in this metaversal space, in this platform that you've developed and built, especially when we talk about events and we talk about a place where we're able to join in together and share and listen? What does community look like to you when it comes to the metaverse?
Great question. So one of the things that I think is really fascinating about what happened during the pandemic with virtual events is that, and with brands really, right? We learned that you can create a community that's really worldwide, and that you can have a larger reach and extension for what you're talking about or what your brand is, whatever that might be. And so we used to have, events where we'd have, 300 to 20,000 people in a physical space. And now you can have, hundreds of thousands of people in one location that's virtual. And one thing, though, that I find that is still pretty limiting, because there's not a ton of completely immersive virtual world events that have occurred at this time. But I've been in a lot of different virtual events and different platforms. And what's really missing is that networking piece and the ability to walk up to someone and just start a conversation about what's happening. And that's like my favorite thing about events. Like basically virtual events took a Hilton and they put it in the middle of the wasteland of South Dakota. And they said, here, have an event. Here's your Hilton. But you can't talk to anyone, but you're kind of in the middle of nowhere. And it's like, I love those experiences where you go to an event, like say you're going to South by Southwest in Austin, and you walk down the corner and you find this really good restaurant with a really great like tiki bar or something like that. And you're hanging out at this tiki bar, and then all of a sudden you're striking up conversations with people, and you're having this full experience that isn't really part of the conference. And that's what I love, or riding your bike next to the waterway, something like that. And what the metaverse does, or any virtual world does, is allows you to have that experience. You can go hang out at a dance club in the metaverse, and aside from your conference, and you can meet other people, and you can walk up to them and have a conversation just like you would in the real world. And you can explore, and you can have these different experiences. The other thing that I think is key is that when we're having video conferences, and we'll just call it a Zoom conference, not to pick on Zoom, but video conferences, Zoom conferences, and you can have a lot of people in the conference who are, in a box talking head, but there's really no conversation happening unless you're, in the chat. But that's kind of being missed. You're not having that exploratory thing happening. And it's causing fatigue because we're not used to seeing people, just our heads in a box and like so intensely like looking at us the whole time, right? Like we're used to being able to like look around and like see different things and explore. Maybe we're on our phone a little bit, different things, but in Zoom, you're like, people are looking at you if you're not looking at them. And that's where we get the Zoom fatigue, and we get just so exhausted and drained if we're in Zoom meetings all day. And just recently, because our metaverse is now up and going, like all of our meetings in-house have been in the metaverse. And I'll tell you, like, we are now so excited to be in meetings again. Whereas before it did feel at the end of the day, I was feeling pretty exhausted being in Zoom meetings all day. And now we're able to like, hey, let's fly over to this place and hang out over here. Or let's like walk around, or let's look at, you can look at the screen, you can look at other people, you can move to different locations. And it's so amazing. And we're so much more creative in that space. And so, as a little backstory to me, and I started out with this, is that I didn't grow up with a lot of technology, and I'm not a gamer. So I didn't know, even when the pandemic started, I was like, this is a good idea, but I didn't know I was going to fall in love with it. And I've really fallen in love with it because it takes what we do to a whole other level of expression. And I see that for other people as well. Like it will allow you to do things that you didn't know you could do. A nod to me being transgender. You can be whatever gender you want. You can be, taller than you are. You can be a lot of different things in there. And that sort of self-expression is really important. And to embody that in this way is really, really quite incredible.
You talk about brands in the metaverse. Company and corporation alike are increasingly discovering and seeking for more understanding about how their whole entire cohort of communities can ingress and take positive advantage in the metaverse. What do you share with us today from the company, business, corporate perspective on what are the benefits that you're seeing early on for companies to get involved in the metaverse?
There's a lot of advantages to it. Absolutely. Number one is that people want to know that you're going to exist in the future, no matter what the future throws at you. So if you're not changing in response to what's going on right now in the world, then you're going to have a loss of connection with people. More people are now involved in games online and are involved in digital technology. We're spending so much more time in digital technology than we used to. And it's an expectation now that even if you go to a physical event, that you better have some sort of interactive, engaging technology that's going to capture my attention. And that is so important. When we're talking about the metaverse specifically, there are more and more people who are spending time there. And there's, those huge concerts that are happening in the metaverse as well. So there's a lot more touch points that are happening and a lot bigger audience. So if you're missing out on being able to sell your brand in digital wear, some sort of object or clothing or something like that for avatars, then people aren't going to connect to you or relate with you as much. And it's it's your job, right? Your job is to connect with what the people want and what they're experiencing. And so you're losing on that connection if you're not doing it. One thing I would like to add as well is something else that we're working on, which is super hybrid. And what super hybrid is, because we are seeing a lot of events that, of course, are going back into physical. We're seeing mixed results with that, with the physical, and there still is a lot of stress in the event production world about it. But what we're seeing is there's a conversation about hybrid, and hybrid is currently what it's being defined as is you're in a physical event and then some people are attending through a streaming video. And again, to go back to my point, like you're missing the networking opportunities there. And you're creating two very different experiences for the people who are physically there and the people who are virtually attending the event, which seems sort of like a disservice, right? And wouldn't it be cool if you're physically at an event and you can connect with all those people who are coming in from around the world? And wouldn't it be cool if you were in a virtual event and you could physically connect in some sort of way with all the people who are physically in that event? And so what we're working, and this is now in prototype, is we're working on a seamless integration of the virtual world, the metaverse, and the physical space, so that you can actually be in a conference, in a networking situation, and walk up to someone who's an avatar in the virtual world and just simply have a conversation. And so, we're kind of taking away the veil between the two technologies. And it's opened up this hugely creative juice in our team, because we do also physical interactive installations. And so now we're taking our physical interactive installations and we're connecting it to the metaverse in different ways. And so now when, for instance, we're doing a installation at a library. So now when you're in this installation at the library, it's a storytelling shade structure that's outside. You can scan a QR code and you can go into the metaverse and land at that exact same structure in the metaverse. And then you can wander around a whole new world for the library. So it's really expanding our own capabilities and how we see, like you said, will you be able to tell our, that difference between the physical and the virtual, and how are those going to bleed into each other? And how are we going to start like being able to really connect with people around the world?
On the topic of accessibility, what are your thoughts, as we know today that accessibility is increasingly becoming a prime agenda for many that advocate for greater accessibility throughout technology, whether that's in the XR industry or artificial intelligence and so forth and so on. What is, from your lens, accessibility mean and look for metaversal platforms?
Another great question. So one of the things we talked about earlier is just the accessibility of actually being able to get into the world. So what we found through doing events through these other platforms early on in the pandemic was that a lot of our clients had, like a 5-year-old Mac or a 7-year-old Mac. And to download a 3 gigabyte or 5 gigabyte software and then try to get into that software with your 5 or 7-year-old Mac or computer, whatever it is very difficult. And it has a lot of hurdles and user hurdles for the person who's trying to do it. And not everyone's keen to just jumping into a digital game. So number one, I would say the fact that we're doing browser based and we do also have an app coming out so you can just use your phone is huge. And that also lowers the kind of technology that you already have to be able to own. Like there's a digital divide, not only in this country, but in the world. I've also talked with companies and organizations in India. And if we look at India, like they have kind of lower than LTE, capabilities. They have like dial-up basically. And then pretty much everyone who has a laptop there, you get a laptop through your work and it's locked. So you can't download anything. So now we've lost like one of the biggest countries in the world that you can't access. And so that's problematic. And we look at Native Americans in the United States. There's not a lot of Wi-Fi in Native American countries. And there are a lot of people in those areas are using their phones and they're using LTE and it's spotty coverage. And so we want to be able to access all those people who have that kind of accessibility issues with technology. The other thing that we look at a lot of these different virtual world platforms, and you go in there and you have maybe 5 different skin tones that you can choose from. And that's not correct for anybody. That's not correct for white people that have 5 different skin tones. It's not correct for brown people, black people, nobody. We have different variations of colors. So just that in itself, like we have limitless amount of different color variations that you can have for your skin tones in our metaverse. And that was so key to what we wanted to be able to do. The other thing to think about is, people who have sight issues, hearing issues, and who also have other physical things, limitations. And I hate to call them limitations. I apologize for that. So other physical experiences that are different. And one thing I think that is unique about my experience is not only am I transgender, so I've had like an experience in the physical world where I've completely transformed myself into something else at a time that it wasn't popular whatsoever. But it also, I was during that time, it's like AOL chat rooms. During that time, I was talking and joining message boards and stuff with people who have physical disabilities, people of color, queer people stuck in really rural places who are dealing with different identity stuff, and having that understanding. I've also worked with incarcerated youth. I've worked with Native Americans. I've worked with developmentally disabled people. So I have a really unique insight for a white man onto what accessibility means. And so I utilize that, and I utilize those communities to help inform me about what that looks like so that we can do a better job. And I couldn't say that I have the absolute answer, right? It's still unfolding, and we're still researching, and we're still talking with people about what that looks like. So I couldn't say that we have it all solved. And that probably will keep, unfolding as things develop.
Ethan, you've said so much to us and shared so much with us. I want to follow with this last question that I have. Based on everything that you've expressed, you certainly have had such a different experience, I think, from most people I personally come across, based on culture, based on gender, based on a lens perspective from a different hue of even mine, of color. And also looking at how that integrates into technology today. As I've said so much, that if we're going to extend reality, then we must bring reality with it. Even when you just mentioned about the colors of different avatars, are we really extending reality with only 5 options about who we are to the essence of our character, what we experience, communities that are bringing that together in a seemingly holistic way? What's the most important thing that we should know about what you have built and what you're building?
Another great question. Thank you for that. I think the most important thing to know about myself and all ethos and data is that we really do come in from a perspective of how can we help build a better world. And I know a lot of people say this, but but it's not just about the money. But it's about how can we help elevate humans to the next evolution of human, and what does that look like? And it's especially important now when we're staring down the fact that we're going to space and we're looking at going to Mars. My kids are talking about being an astrobiologist. My high schooler kid is talking about being an astrobiologist. Like, these are all things that we didn't have as options, previously, but now we do. And so what do we want to take with us as we explore and we do these new things in the new world? And how do we want to be as humans? Because right now, we're going through a lot of self-recognition, as a human species. And we're trying to reckon even how do we make sure that our planet is sustainable for us to be able to be on. So I take all these things into consideration. And I look at it from so many different perspectives, and I make sure that the storytelling isn't just me retelling a story of a Native American experience. I make sure to bring in people who are telling those stories and let them tell their own stories and help facilitate the technology. And that is a key difference, because I see time and time again, and again, it goes back to the accessibility thing for technology, is that there's the privilege of what's happening in all of these spaces that is dictating the story that's being told, and what story even you or anyone else can tell as a user of that space. And so I really want to help integrate a lot of different things and see, what kind of future do we want? So I always look at things, from a 20-year perspective. It's 20 years from now, how would I want to be looking back as to how we did today? And it makes for an interesting business model. I'll tell you that, because we're looking at, we want to expand and we want to do a ticketed event space that's more of an immersive ticketed experience and all these things. And it's like the easy thing to do would be for me to go get investors. But I've seen companies, and I've been alongside them and seen their journey. And it's like, do we want investors who are going to have a say in what we're doing? Because they might not have the same vision about it. They might keep the brand. I've seen that happen. They keep the brand, but when it's boots on the ground it's not what they're doing. So yeah, so I think that's really it. Like we really take that first and foremost into what we're doing to make sure that it stays with the vision no matter what.
Ethan Bach, thank you for being my guest. And thank you for taking the time to explore with us. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.